But getting him diagnosed was a real challenge because he, to this day, doesn't believe that anything's wrong with him, and he thinks it's just old age. And so when he went to the doctor for the first time, he just told them that we were making everything up and there was nothing wrong with him at all.
Is there a sort of tipping point when you realise that he needs to be looked after, that he can't be able to rely on himself in just ordinary life?
Absolutely. I mean, it's taken a while for him to get to the real tipping point. But to give you some examples now, I mean, it's like parenting a child. You have to remind him to put his seatbelt on, brush his teeth. He's quite often found walking around the village just in his socks and without a coat in pouring rain, because he just hasn't got a clue how to look after himself anymore.
Who's his main carer now?
So it's entirely down to my mother as his carer. It's really hard to sort of get into the care system, and so my mother had to give up her job, which was actually her salvation for many years, her sort of piece of her that she was still able to go and do. But about 5 years ago, she just had to hand it all in and spend 24/7 looking after him.
And what about you? I mean, your own experience of dealing with this. I mean, this is your father. He relates to you and your life. He's important. He's central. Does that change a lot for you as his child?
My life has really changed. My relationship with him has changed. It's really sad. Like, he was always such a big part of our lives growing up, so interested in what I did and what I do. And I've followed him into a career in commercial property, but he just doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't even realize that that's what I do now. I think it's been even harder for my sister because she was still in her teens when he was diagnosed. And it's just hugely embarrassing. And it's not something as a teenager that you want your friends to be coming around to your house and seeing his behavior, which was quite disruptive. And it's just, she will always say she had the most embarrassing father out there, and that's a fact. So it's hugely changed it. And now we just take on the caring role, which again is very sad. And we've just spent the last 10 years watching our dad disappear piece by piece and kind of grieving the death of him, even though he's still physically here.
This piece by piece thing is interesting what you say, because this treatment we're going to talk about in a moment, which we should say is not one which would actually help his particular condition, but it is something which talks about arresting the progress of the disease. From your point of view as a family and thinking of future patients, would it be a godsend to think early on that you could at least slow it?
Absolutely. I think I'm looking at this treatment as something for the future and such good hope for me and my family and friends going forwards. It might not be for my dad, but it might be for me in the future if I get dementia, and if I know that it can be slowed and I can have more of my normal life for as long as possible. That's the best we can ask for.
Of Alzheimer's Research UK. Susan, this particular research breakthrough, tell me what it is, what it does.
Yeah, it's really exciting times. And obviously, I think Laura's really articulated well the challenges and heartbreak that so many families face. But lecanemab is the drug that's of interest. It's had a press release, which means we've got initial findings. We don't have full data yet, but lecanemab is a potential drug specifically for Alzheimer's disease, which is one of the key diseases that causes dementia. And it works by removing a particular protein called amyloid that you find in your brain. And it has been shown in the clinical trials, which are quite a kind of restricted environment, that it can help to slow down patients' decline in memory and to help improve with day-to-day activities.
Yes, I think I think the figure was that after 18 months, it slowed the progression by about 27%. But that's something, isn't it?
Definitely it's something. And I think what's really important here is it's the historic kind of proof of concept that we can do something to change how these diseases progress. It's a starting point. It isn't going to be the only drug we might need or the perfect drug, but it is a start. If we think about progress in cancer, the first drugs weren't the best, but you build on the progress that you made. And that's what makes it so important across the field, and why, as you said, it may not benefit Laura's dad, but it will hopefully benefit the field more generally, bring more focus, bring more investment, and that in itself will kind of snowball and help the field across the whole of dementia.
When we say it's helpful for people with early Alzheimer's in arresting the progress of the disease, there could be a problem here, couldn't there? Because as we've just been hearing, some patients just don't agree there's anything wrong with them. It's not an easy one, that, is it?
No, it's not. It is a real challenge and something we as a charity have been saying for some time, that the way many people are diagnosed happens really quite late. They've got quite profound symptoms for a whole host of reasons, which is quite understandable. But with a drug like this, we do believe it will probably be most effective at the earliest stages. And because it takes out this particular protein called amyloid, you've also then got to make sure you're only giving it to people who have got amyloid in their brains, which means we need some quite specialist diagnostic tests to be available. They've been used in research and they're only really starting to come to clinical practice, and we will need to make sure that they are more widely available across the NHS. It's a real challenge, but I think it's an important one we need to start working on now. And that's why we're working more broadly to kind of encourage the governments to kind of embrace the challenges and the opportunities around new treatments for dementia. We've been talking about wanting a dementia mission, which pulls much of this together and that could help sort of fast track some of these challenges.
Can you actually detect amyloid protein in the brain? I mean, is this something which scans can find?
Yeah, it can be measurable now. There's two ways at the moment, one of which is a very specific, a PET scan, which can identify the amyloid in your brain. You can also identify it using taking a lumbar puncture from the spine and testing the cerebral spinal fluid. Both of those aren't probably going to be available to everyone across the country. They're quite specific, they can be quite expensive. What is intriguing is that we know that there are blood tests that are being developed. They're not yet ready to be used day to day by the clinicians, but the potential of a blood test could be really helpful in actually picking up on amyloid.
Thanks. Well, let's just quickly go back to Laura, who's on the front line of all this. Does this give you hope? Do you get a sense of things marching on, and that maybe family problems like yours will not be so inevitable in the future?
Absolutely. I think it's really what Susan said about it's just building on these developments, and hopefully 10 years ago or 20 years ago there weren't that many treatments for cancer. So let's get Alzheimer's and dementia to the same place that cancer is now and keep sort of snowballing, as Susan said, on that impact.
Maybe if there'd been a blood test or a PET scan early on, your father, as a clever man, maybe might have accepted it.
Yes, I really think that he would have, and would have been happy to do that. It's just when it's something to do with your brain, I suppose you don't feel so comfortable believing that you've got dementia at such a young age.